Hey everybody, welcome to Policy Streams. I am Jamie.
And I'm Bernard. Policy Streams is a flow of casual conversations about people and their policy interests. Today, we have a special guest that will bring us through an issue that has been at the center of focus for countries like South Korea and Singapore.
Indeed. Today we're going to talk about the spy cam epidemic. This is a topic that I've personally been very concerned about, especially given the rise of incidents where students in Singapore universities have been caught using spy cams to peep on victims while they're engaged in intimate moments like showering or just being in the toilet. So South Korea seems to also face the daily consequences of spy cams. So we're going to find out more throughout this conversation. To understand where we stand in terms of the spy cam epidemic, we have joining us a fantastic guest, Shay. Welcome, Shay. How are you doing today?
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for the warm welcome. I'm doing pretty good. Sem's just started, but yeah, it's pretty hectic already.
You know, Shay, whenever I think about you, I think about this is a person that you don't want to mess with, right?
Yeah, I get that a lot. I honestly get that a lot.
The Shay attitude. Where does this attitude come from, Shay? Like, why should we not mess with you?
Like, I don't know, because it's me speaking on behalf of myself. So I don't know where this portrayal comes from. But I think it's definitely having something to do with how unfiltered I am. I really don't have a lot of I don't have high tolerance for people who either can't talk properly, it's they can't organize what they want to say. B, if it's some really bigoted or conservative thought, that's not even something that's arguable. It's just something that's illogical, right? I think that's where I come from. And considering the fact that I've been debating since high school, I think that also makes me a bit more aggressive, I guess, compared to other people. And I tend to be very reactive.
And you're very quick to call out on somebody's bullshit.
Yes. I think I'm the unofficial delegate of doing that in our class.
I know you've spent some time in Korea, you spent some time abroad as well. Can you just tell us a little bit about, where you've been placed throughout your life?
Right. So my timeline, it's actually quite simple. So I was born in Korea. I wasn't born in Seoul. I was born in a southern province. And we moved to Seoul. I went to preschool. And when I was 6, we moved to the States. I was in New Jersey because my dad pursuing his PhD. And after living in the States for about, 6 years and a half, I moved back to Korea. And from grade 5 since, I've been in Korea. So now, at this point of my life, I've been in Korea longer than I've been in the States.
So I know, coming to the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, that's not the first time you've been in Singapore. What motivated you to come back to Lee Kuan Yew School, and have you been here before?
Yeah, so like Bernard said, it's not my first time. So I've been to Singapore when I was in high school, but that's just completely irrelevant to why I chose to come to Lee Kuan Yew SPP. The reason behind me enrolling into this school is that I actually did my exchange student program at NUS under Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, FASS, if I got that right, for my last semester in undergrad. And I actually went, surprisingly, because I wanted to study. So it wasn't everybody else who wanted to go to Singapore because, cheap flights to Southeast Asian countries. I actually wanted to go because NUS was quite renowned for being, influential in studies. And they had a really solid IR course. So, doing some research, I decided, okay, I could go to NUS. But my second option was, Spain. I wanted to go travel Europe. So I didn't know what would happen. I got NUS somehow. It's very competitive. I don't know how I got the place, actually. And I came to NUS and I met probably one of the most influential professors of my life. She was a female prof teaching sub-Saharan African IR. And she was the only prof in my life that I've met so far that I could just listen to for hours. I didn't need a break. I could listen to her talk for 3 hours straight. And it was so interesting to see a female figure in a very male-dominated field. So that sort of triggered me into thinking, what if I don't want to study in the States where it's going to be very heavily male-dominated, but also I would be subjected to a lot of racism, which I've already been subjected to a lot in my life. So I thought maybe studying in Asia would be an interesting way of unraveling my life, although it'd be a quite disputed choice to make because it's not what an average Korean would choose to do. But yeah, I chose to enroll in Lee Kuan Yew SPP because I was interested to see what Singapore could bring to me.
So Shay, you mentioned that you do look up to this one figurehead that you had, who's one of the first women professors that you would engage with at the academic institutional level. Quite interested in understanding a bit more from your perspective as well, what your policy interests are and where do you see yourself in the academic space?
For me, I think it's quite natural considering the fact that I did my undergrad diploma in political science and like more specifically international relations. So I guess one field of interest for me that I would definitely be keen on exploring more would be, I guess, Korea relations, like Korea US, or these days what's booming is Korea Southeast Asia relations, as ASEAN has been pinpointed as one of the next regions that Korea should be investing in. But another field or like area of interest that I would be definitely keen on exploring more would be, I guess, gender policies. I think not only simply being a female, but being a female in a very politically turbulent society, which Korea is definitely part of and portraying a lot of characteristics of. I think it's one area where I would like to invest. So at least minimum, I wouldn't be making policies, but I'll be having conversations with people so I could influence their ideologies, their thoughts, or if I ever have a kid in the future or have a spouse in the future, it's something that can bring up so we can change the next generation.
So I've been to South Korea a couple of times myself, and I have seen some Korean dramas. But the first off impression I get when I was in South Korea was it's a very patriarch society, and part of that probably lends to right now the spy cam epidemic as well. And Jamie, I'd like to probably turn over to you as well to try and unpack that a little bit, some of the details that you'd want to get into in this topic.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the spy cam epidemic, right? I'm interested in this, and unfortunately, throughout your stay in Singapore, you've witnessed, I think, was it two occurrences where we've had NUS students or students from other universities,
I think two, yeah.
Was it two? Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, commit some really terrible, crimes, peeping on people while they're showering, filming that, or having people cameras in the toilet. What is your take on this, and compare that to some of the things that you already know about this whole spy cam issue? How do you feel about this?
I think it's pretty clear. I think it's pretty evident on how I respond to being asked how I feel about it. I'm definitely angry.
Yeah.
But I guess as a Korean, what I found interesting was that people were shook by witnessing that this had happened in Singapore. I don't think it's something that we should be shocked about. I think considering, and this is me based on like my very little knowledge of sex education and how students are educated in Singapore, I think it's something that was quite predictable. The shock factor comes from the fact that it happened in a school amongst the younger generation who we assume to be more woke, as one puts it, right? But if you consider so from what I heard about sex education in Singapore is that it's like a blanket policy. It's not a blanket policy. You skim over it. It's something that's sort of taboo still. And I think it's sort of similar to Korea. Not in sex ed, we're not taught about sex. I think we're taught about our period, but that's pretty much it. We know where babies come from. That's pretty much it. The idea of consent or what sexual intercourse is, why it happens, why it's not something where you objectify another person regardless of their gender. None of that is covered. And considering how, I don't know how, but I'm pretty sure people use VPN, and most of the education that people receive is either from their friends, people around them, or what they can find on the internet, which would be porn. And considering how not a lot of things are regulated, or even if they are regulated, we're not exposed to that regulation procedure, it's very easy to have a misconception of sex. And through that, you tend to objectify genders.
So Shay, how far away do you think South Korea is from that consent culture? Do we have a long way to go, or we're almost there?
I think the answer will always be we're not gonna be there anytime soon. We're still a long way ahead.
Yeah.
But within this time span and the spectrum, we've definitely made some progress, but it will never be enough to make like legal measures or policies that will deter this from happening, because it'll always, like, the policy we've been having so far are mostly like, I guess, protective measures, not for the victim, but like, protective measures in a sense where we have some legal acknowledgement of the fact that there's a social problem happening.
One of the things that really sparked brought my attention to Korea and the whole spy cam epidemic was a video that was published by Asian Boss, titled "Korea's #1 Spy Cam Hunter on a Mission to Stop Illegal Porn." And in that video, you see this expert basically showing you how a lot of hotels in Korea, or motels, or whatever place, even in public areas like toilets and stuff, they have spy cameras. And this guy basically was able to hide 30 spy cameras within that hotel room. And he got someone to try to search for these cameras. And it was really hard to find them. And the point of the video was that this is not an isolated incident. You have this as an everyday thing in Korea. How do you feel about that? Do you feel safe using these facilities? Or how do you think we can advance in getting rid of these cameras?
So I haven't seen the Asian Boss video, but there were a couple of documentaries made in Korea that sort of made you aware that you're not really safe in public space, but also there was one that like sort of taught you how to catch these spy cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, first of all, and I think it's a sad reality, but if you're living as a female in South Korea, the context being that that so many spy cam incidents have happened, the sad reality is that every time you use public space, like you go up the stairs, or you're in the subway, or you really, really, really need to use the restroom and you go to a restroom, you will use it understanding the risk that some parts of you may be exposed to a ambiguous public on an online space.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, there's nothing you can do to stop it. Mm-hmm. For example, let's say that you did find a spy camera, and you in a hotel, right? So you call up the front desk and you say, "Hey, I found this spy camera." They're not going to do anything about it. They're going to apologize, but they're not going to make any changes. They'll take it out because you found it, but they're not going to make any more extensive measures to like search all of their rooms, try to figure out using, I don't know, the IP address to see who placed this. Like, there's no incentive for these places to change. One thing that has changed was that in public bathrooms, because people have been so angry over it, and I think it makes perfect sense. Like, you can't even use the bathroom, but like, going to the bathroom is like nature's call, like you need to go and you go.
Yeah.
So what Korea has done actually is to show there's like a little calendar in each of the stalls in Korea. I think the female bathrooms, not the male ones, where they show that on this date, there's been an inspection for this stall to make sure there are no spy cameras.
I see.
So they do, I guess, we assume, a regular, inspection of these toilets. And so in some of these public toilets, they also installed a like spy cam finder where you have a red piece of film paper, and if you put that over your cell phone camera lens and you put the flash on, you're able to detect the spy cameras. So we have some measures that's been implemented, but yeah, obviously it's not enough, and most of us live in fear.
Personally, I take quite a lot of issue with the kind of measures that they're putting in place, because to me, it sounds like you're addressing the symptoms rather than the problem itself. When I was in South Korea a few years ago, I just bought a brand new iPhone, and I was really proud of it. And I was taking pictures around South Korea because I was a tourist. And then my friend was also helping me take pictures with his iPhone. And then when he took a picture, it made a really loud camera noise. And I was like, what is wrong with your phone? And he told me that it's every single phone in South Korea has a mandatory requirement to make a noise when it takes a picture, because of the whole pervert epidemic with people taking pictures inappropriately. And that, this just is one of the issues of addressing the symptom, along with some of the measures that Shay was talking about, when it really comes back down to how do you talk or how do you instill that sense of respect for the opposite gender, which is, I feel like it's completely missing in a patriarch society like South Korea, like Japan, like potentially Singapore. And it's around how do you respond to that in the right way that so that we're tackling the problem and not the symptoms.
So I can definitely echo your disappointment towards the policies only addressing the symptoms. But if you were to ask me what kind of measurements we need to take, we would need to implement in society to get rid of the problem, I would say everything, both addressing the root cause, but also addressing the symptoms. Because there will always be outliers, but also more importantly, changing the root cause of the problem is going to take a very long, because we're talking about changing the education system. We're talking about changing the sexual education system in Korea or any other conservative Asian society where you always have parents being a bit conservative, a bit mindful of what's being taught to their children, but also a government that's conservative in a sense where they don't want to irk the conservative public. So these changes aren't going to happen anytime soon. We do see some, I guess, grassroots movements where you have schools inviting lecturers who are more informed about these problems and more informed about sexual intercourse or like anything related to sexual education, like consent. And they come to the school and lecture you for like maybe once a year. But it's not something that's going to become regular in our public education anytime soon.
So I've been thinking about how we can nip it at the bud, right? And one of the most, I think, extreme ideas that I had was to stop the sales of spy cameras. And I say this because I was in Vietnam once, and there were some other things that were a bit iffy about the place that we're living in. So my partner and I got a bit spooked, and then we started searching for spy cameras, but thankfully we didn't find any, or maybe we're just not good enough. We didn't manage to find it. But that led me to Googling about how to find spy cameras. And that's when I came across this article showing all the different variations of spy cameras that are available. And that's when it just shook to me, because it's so easy for someone to purchase a spy camera that is obviously, and in that article, the person also wrote it with a smiley, winky face, like, you know what to do with this spy camera. Yeah, and you know what he's insinuating, right? And so there are spy cameras in pens, in hangers, and these like smoke detectors. They have it in remote controls. They have it on your glasses sometimes. They have it in alarm clocks. And it got me thinking, like, why is it that we allow such rampant sale of spy cameras? And what are the positive upsides to spy cameras and why they ought to remain in the market? And so I did a little bit more searching and I realized, okay, sometimes people use spy cameras to check if someone is stealing, or for parents, right? They have a camera there to see how their child is doing. But I think in the parent situation, it would be quite creepy if you use a spy camera. So they have like these baby cameras things. But yeah, what do you think about this? Is just reducing the sale or having some kind of regulation that does not allow for these rampant sales of obviously unethical spying devices, do you think that's a possible solution?
I definitely think it is. I'm not sure why it hasn't been implemented so far. I'm pretty sure it's because of capitalism and because these businesses make a lot of money from selling spy cameras. But it really makes you question, right? Because once drones became very accessible in the market, people start to say, oh, it breaches personal privacy. But it also just, has a lot to do with national security, because you don't know what these like drones are going to catch, which is why in some countries, they started to make it mandatory for you to, I guess, like register your drone and only take your drone to specific areas. And like, for example, if there are a couple of beaches or like parks where it explicitly says on like a notice board that you cannot fly drones, right? So we've had some measures for drones which use cameras, which can be abused for peeping into people's houses. I don't know why that hasn't been implemented for spy cams. I think it goes back to the whole capitalistic argument, but also maybe it's because that there are too many hurdles. So for you to create policies, you need to show that there's a cost and benefit analysis where you will be able to succeed by after you get rid of all these camera sales, you'll be able to get rid of the problem. but it's difficult for you to assure that because it's so easy. Like, you know how easy it is for you to make a bomb or for you to make meth, right? It's so easy to have access to these things because they're not considered as ingredients to make this dangerous weapon. It's just there for various uses. So considering how there's a lot of loopholes, I guess it would be seen as inefficient for you to address this as a possible solution.
I agree with that as well, Shay. I think there's way too many hurdles to try cut out completely because there will always be ways around it. And honestly speaking, in terms of policymakers' perspectives or governors' perspectives, they probably would look at other priorities in terms of what kind of products they want to limit from the market. So there's one angle where you look at it from the economic perspective. How do you stop it? The supply of these things. The other aspect is how do you promote a social norm around not doing these things? And I think we saw significant movements towards that with the Me Too movement a couple of years ago, and it made its ways around the world. Even in South Korea, it made its ways with mass protests from women and men alike as well. In terms of that call out culture, that ability to say, this is not right, and I'm going to say no to it. And I'm not going to care if I get spoken out against it, or I know that people will be behind my back when I call out against this kind of culture. In South Korea, how far are we away from that? And are we seeing a shift towards a more call out culture to try to normalize a more respectful culture?
I think it's an interesting question with a lot of different facets to it. I think we definitely have some establishment of call out culture where you wouldn't be, I guess, psychologically or emotionally deterred from voicing out your opinions or your discomfort in a patriarchic society. You now have a lot of the younger generation calling out on things where they find very uncomfortable with things. Where, for example, what you see in K-dramas or in campaigns, where there's a lot of gender descriptions that makes you think like, is this really the proper way of doing things? But the problem is that calling it out is one thing, but how it's perceived is another. And from there, we have an entrenchment of a really, really toxic cycle where even if you have the courage to say something, you will be either ignored or you will influence others to not voice out their opinions because they see how you are being addressed. And I think that's where we have a lot of political tension within the Korean environment. Whenever you say something that's related to gender equality, it's not even feminism, just gender equality, it immediately triggers the word feminism and it immediately triggers the word, oh, you're being radical. So for example, I could be wearing a shirt that says something positive about gender equality, and I will have hate comments saying, oh, you're being a feminist. And they say it in a very derogatory manner, like something negative, and they brand you for it. So we have all these things on the online platform where even if you call out, you deter others from calling it out. So I think it's a difficult question to answer.
I absolutely agree. I think as a girl, what I do notice is when you try to voice out that you were unfairly harassed or you felt quite uncomfortable with a certain situation, it can be very hard for you to feel justified in saying, no, this person definitely like touched me or did something, because how other people perceive you, the way they perceive you making that claim is, she's just acting up, or she just, like, I didn't touch her, like she just imagined it or something like that. And it's really hard to feel validated in how you feel when everyone is ready to cast a different kind of perception regarding how you felt.
So I guess another way to phrase that would be that it's so easy as a social minority for you to be fatigued. Because no matter how many times you voice out your opinion, there will always be a stronger opposition that will sort of mold you into a different person or with a different I guess personality than you had before. So for instance, this is my personal experience. I was actually a victim of being spy cammed in a public bathroom at a pub during undergrad. And as someone who's so outspoken or so interested in gender policies, who knows who's had countless conversations about consent and all these important agendas, when that actually happened to me, I didn't know how to react because we're not taught that we should react. We're not taught how to react. So what happened was I was using the bathroom. All of a sudden, this guy comes in, just like puts his cell phone under the stall, like below the door, and was taking a, I don't know if it was taking a video or a photo. Like he was definitely taking something of me, right? And at that moment, it took me a good while for me to understand what was happening. And all I could do was just like try to smack his hand away. But obviously, like the phone fell, he took it, and then he ran away. So I never got to see who this perpetrator was, like what I could do.
Mm.
And then at that moment, I realized there's really something wrong with how we're being educated, because you don't know how to react. I think that's also another problem. Like we don't know what to do.
I take that one step further as well. It's one aspect where you don't know how to respond to this because you might have been grown up in an environment where you're a lot more passive in the way you do things. But then the other aspect is there isn't the way the institution is set up is to be against you. Because if you want to make these complaints, if you want to make a report, there's so many hurdles that you have to go through that you're either fatigued or you kind of almost have to relive the trauma that you've just gone through.
Yeah, so what's interesting is that there's definitely like institutionalized barriers. So for example, let's say that you did catch the person who was taking an illegal photo of you. You file a complaint. You can't have anything else than a quote unquote sincere apology and maybe some financial compensation, because from the legal perspective, they won't see it as a illegal photo taken without your consent. That has to do with your sexual intimacy or etc. They'll just say that, oh, but like we can't really see the face of this person in the camera, so we're not really sure if it's you. So we can't really, have any validation from you saying that you've been through a lot of emotional trauma and stress. So it's really difficult for you to have for you to have a persuasive argument in the eyes of the police or the prosecutor that you've been victimized.
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think this reminds me of one of the conversations that our cohort had regarding the recent case of the NUS student who studies dentistry. Yeah, so I think the whole debate was, in my opinion, we had this conversation in class and we were saying that, should this guy be expelled or should he not be expelled? And then some people made the argument that he shouldn't be expelled because this has nothing to do with NUS. This has to be dealt with by the Singapore law. And then some of us, think that we should be not just focusing on this person's supposed future because they were concerned about this person's future being dashed, but rather focus on what happened to the girl. She had her eyes pressed in till it bled. She was choked. She was strangled. And somehow the conversation still does not revolve around the trauma that she faced and how she would feel if she knew that this person is still allowed to roam free in a school that she may or may not be in the future. I'm not sure if she eventually enrolled into NUS. But I think this really encapsulates what I think is so disturbing personally to me, which is that even when things do occur, the focus tends to not be on the victim, but on the perpetrator and what the potential consequences could be for him, and that just upsets me.
I think what was interesting about the article itself was that it said which department he was from. Like, I don't know what it had to do with anything. So it sort of like insinuates maybe because of his position or where he is from, what his affiliations are, that determines what kind of punishment he might be subjected to. But I think aside from that, another point I want to add is that the fact that people try to disengage the school from the problem is the exact reason why our education system needs to change. Like, school isn't simply about being taught, like academically, about your field of interest. It's a new environment, right? It's a different kind of environment where it should be a safe space for people. Obviously, it hasn't been doing that. If something happens within your school, of course that individual should be punished. But responsibility also lies on the school itself. Why? Because they've failed to deter things that could have been easily deterred, that could have been easily prevented, things that they could have done to intervene to make sure that there was a safe space for victims, that's something that can be very easily done. That's not being done right now. So if you see it from one perspective, you can sort of say that the school is neglecting its duties. It doesn't care about the well-being of its students as long as they make some profit off of us, which I think is a very popular opinion that a lot of students have in Korea.
I think when it first kind of was initially discussed, the angle came from the school should do a lot more to protect the student. My immediate response to that was, I think the school, because it was on private premise, the school wasn't in a position necessarily to intervene at that point in time. But I do, but then it's exactly as you said, Jamie, the conversation then kind of geared towards as well what the newspaper reflected. It's not really in the school's position to make a decision about this person, let the school decide. And then the newspaper angle on it also talked about, you could be ruining this person's future and all that kind of stuff, but it completely overlooked how the victim would have felt, how the victim will continue to feel, how the victim will have to carry that going on into the future. And I think, institutions have a responsibility to protect people who are the victims. And I think they could have definitely gone beyond a step of, that's a lot more harsh, the school that is, in terms of whether it's suspension or whether it's a very clear message that this kind of behavior is not okay.
Yeah, I think the messaging of these rulings do matter because that gives us a sense of, if I were someone who might do that same illegal act in the future, I may take my cue from how the law is going to punish me accordingly. If I think I can get off, with the slap on the wrist, that's not going to deter me a lot. But yeah.
There's this movie, there's this series, it's called Westworld. I don't know if you guys have seen it.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, the premise of that is that you're in a life world where all the people that you interact with are artificial intelligence. And there are no rules in this world. So you enter it, you're dealing with artificially intelligent kind of beings, but they're actually very smart. The way that they interact with you, they're almost human. They're pretty much human. But because you're in a world where there are no rules, it's crazy the kind of stuff that people will go through. And that's just the premise of the concept of the series, where if there are no rules, and there's no enforcement, then you can go towards doing very dark things.
Like the human mind is very peculiar, considering that everybody is unique in their own way. In a good way of saying it, there's also so many things that happens in a person's mind that we are not aware of. Right? And I think that's why we have all these things happening. And it's really important for you to have some institution addressing it.
And especially how that's where this education system falls in as well. We need to be learning that culture of respect to instill that.
Yeah. I think the what do you call that? The importance of how we judge, rule these things, and as an institution, the kind of messaging that we send is extremely important, and it should not be overlooked. And it reminds me of this story that I learned when I was doing philosophy, which is the Ring of Gyges. Are you guys familiar with that story?
No, I've never heard of it.
It's basically where they said that imagine you have a ring and it can make you like invisible. So no one's going to catch you for whatever you do. What are you going to do? Are you going to do good things? Or are you going to do bad things? What do you think?
I think I'm a pessimist, and I feel like people would do bad things.
What about you, Shay?
I feel like, okay, maybe this is just me because I'm being recorded. I feel like I'll just never put the ring on. But then seeing, I think that's what Lord of the Rings used, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's very similar.
So from that perspective, I think people do very evil things. I think from my extent, I would just steal cake. But yeah.
I see. Yeah. But the story of it was that he believes that human nature is inherently selfish and unjust. And so justice is not good in itself. Like people will only be just because there is consequences that they have to face. And so this really brings me back to, why I think consequences are so important.
I was just having a second thought as to what I would do if I had that. And Shay mentioned steal cake. think I would steal a double McSpicy from McDonald's.
Oh my god, please
Boo.
don't. That's like the first thing I will eat when I go back to Singapore.
Exactly. You know, Shay was the one who told me about you must have a double McSpicy with cheese. You must have your chicken nuggets with curry sauce. And I was like, the hell you on? You know, like what is curry sauce? But cheese and McSpicy and curry sauce and chicken nuggets are bomb.
Amazing,
So
right?
good.
And you
It's so
guys don't
good.
have it out of Singapore, right? It's just a
We
Singapore
don't-
curry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think what we should be aware of is that regardless of how pessimistic people may be of law, it's definitely something that we need to keep our eyes on, like be focused on, because I think Jamie just addressed punishment, right? Punishment isn't simply about making sure that you deter this from happening again, because as a pessimist, I don't think people are gonna change after you charge them a fine or they go through jail. I'm pretty sure there's a high chance of them being the perpetrator again for the same crime. But what I think it's important is that we have so many other things that are just atrocious in the world, and we heavily punish it. Why aren't spy cams treated the same? Why is it that the weight of the crime isn't reflected in the weight of the punishment? Why is it that the crime itself is seen that it's equal to maybe like stealing something off a mom and pop store, right? Like, I think that's why we have this certain insinuation within society that it's okay for you to commit sex crimes because it's not that bad, right? And this goes back to the whole like military idea, right? Within the military in Korea, it's very natural for your supervisor to say, "Oh, are you stressed? You should go have sex with a hooker." Like,
Do
right?
they say
There's so-
that?
Yes, it's very common. There's so many unfiltered things because people think so easy of it. This is something that needs to be regulated, and I think this is where law should definitely step in. Second of all, I think we need to be mindful of echo chambers, that there will always be people who will refuse to listen to you. Like, no matter what kind of conversation you have, no matter what they are exposed to, there will always be people stuck in their own echo chambers. I think it's a really difficult question for us to ask. How should we deal with this? I think that's something that we should all try to, ask ourselves every day. Trying to ask, what can I do to make sure that this person may not agree with me, but can understand where I'm coming from? And I think from here, it's always important for us to have like conversations with our friends, with our peers, with our family even, because I live with my family now, and sometimes we have conversations where I'll be very triggered by things that they say. So I guess try to start out with the people that you're close to first, and never think it is your fault for voicing out such quote unpopular opinions where universally and from social trends and movements we can always see that you're quite right and they're quite wrong.
Thanks for leaving us with those thoughts, Shay. That was really insightful and I think very helpful for how we can start looking at things as well.
I think what I've taken away from this conversation is not just perspective about Singapore, but perspective about Korea as well. And we touched on some very important topics like making sure that we're listening more to victims instead of just the perpetrators. And also talked a little bit about the policy aspects and the hurdles and obstacles we might face in trying to get rid of the spy cam epidemic at its butt, like, for example, through removing spy cameras, and also more importantly, changing societal understandings about how they ought to be women, how they ought to interact with women respectfully and with consent in the stuff that they do. So yeah, it's been a really great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Shay.
No problem, my pleasure.